Have you ever imagined what it's like to be thrown into a nursing home by your own children? I never thought it could happen to me until I felt, for the first time, the weight of the silence that night I was left there. I remember the strong smell in the hallway, the clock ticking away as if someone had pressed pause on my life, the door closing without anyone looking back. What they did to me wasn't an accident, and deep down, I knew that all that care talk was just the tip of the iceberg of something much more sinister. I won't lie. There were times when I thought I couldn't handle it. There are details that still keep me awake, flashes of that day when I realized everything had truly changed. But before I tell you how my children ruined their own inheritance by trying to discard me, you need to understand who I was and why I never silently accepted what they did to me. That night, I was left at the nursing home. Memories of the past wouldn't leave me alone. It was impossible not to think about everything I'd experienced leading up to my arrival there. My name is Margaret Collins, born on August 18, 1943, in a small town called Southbridge in the Illinois countryside. I grew up watching my mother wake up early to light our wood-burning stove, and it was there that I learned the value of a job well done. I was 24 when I married for the first time, full of plans and never imagining that, just a few years later, I'd be alone with 3 small children in my arms. My husband left on an ordinary Tuesday, October 26, 1971. He said he needed to breathe and never came back. I didn't cry in front of the children, but in the bathroom, with the faucet running to muffle the sound, I allowed myself to fall apart. I had 2 daughters and a son. Carol, the oldest, was 7, Brian, 5, and Alice, 3. I didn't have a college degree, but I knew how to make bread better than anyone. I decided to turn my home kitchen into a bakery, using a second-hand industrial oven I bought on installments with the last of my husband's unemployment insurance money. In the beginning, the bakery only operated from 5 in the morning until noon. I kneaded the dough, shaped the loaves, assembled the trays, and cared for the children at the same time. Outsiders thought it was just a difficult phase, but every night was a gamble on our family's survival. I remember the noise of the ovens, the smell of flour sticking to my hands, the bone weariness after 48 batches in a single Saturday. It was always me and that clock on the wall, keeping time while my children slept on mattresses spread across the kitchen floor. I forced myself to keep my head up because I couldn't show any signs of weakness. When the bread didn't rise properly, I had no one to share my frustration with. When rent was tight, it was to the children I smiled, promising that everything would be all right. On July 15, 1975, I finally rented a small business on the town's main street. The sign, Collins Bakery, hot bread all day, was hand-painted by a neighbor, and I'll never forget the sense of pride I felt when I saw my children helping wash the windows on opening day. The bakery's first anniversary, on August 10, 1976, was celebrated with a cornmeal cake baked by Carol and a cardboard sign designed by Brian and Alice. That day, I sold 120 loaves, the most since opening. I still keep, folded, the paper from the first large order we received, 40 loaves of French bread for a local school party. I woke up every day at 4:30, prepared the yeast, and by 5:30, the smell of fresh bread filled the street air. People would pass by the door just to smell the aroma. I never needed anyone to defend me. When customers complained about the price or the salt, I resolved it firmly. When my children fought, I was the one they turned to. I taught Carol how to calculate change, Brian how to carry 25-kilo bags of flour, Alice how to make butter biscuits. I didn't want them to remember their childhood only through hardships, so I made a point of creating simple moments, picnics in the backyard with leftover bread, Friday nights around the stove telling old family stories. What kept me going was my commitment to never letting food go missing on their table. That's why, every time someone complimented the bread, I felt a sense of relief. Each compliment guaranteed another day without hunger. The truth is, my life has never been easy, but I never accepted the idea of being a victim of other people's choices. I was a mother, a father, a housewife, and a businesswoman all at once, and I didn't have time to complain. The pride of seeing my children growing up healthy was what paid the price for the exhaustion. And even when money was tight, when the electricity bill was late, and I had to sell candy around the neighborhood to cover the cost, I always kept a silent promise. As long as it depended on me, No one in that house would go without. The years passed, the children grew up, each going their own way, and I became known as the bakery lady. On March 27, 1992, I managed to pay the last installment on the loan for the industrial oven. My name was removed from the defaulters registry after 16 years of struggle. I never forgot that receipt. I keep it to this day, folded inside an old recipe book, as a reminder that nothing was given to me for free. If you think it's easy, try working Sunday to Sunday for 40 years and see if you have the strength left to mourn. I could count every scar on my hands, pan burns, knife cuts, marks of time and responsibility. I was proud of those marks. If someone asked me today if I would change anything, the answer would be no. What kept me going was knowing I was indispensable to those three. I never imagined that one day all that effort and all that love would become just a number in a bank account. And it was that thought that sustained me for a long time. But nothing I'd experienced prepared me for what was yet to come. What they did to me was unlike any problem I'd ever faced. And when I realized what was really happening, everything I believed in crumbled in ways I could never have imagined. I always thought I knew my children better than anyone, but the last few months started to change that. First came the visits, which were always quick, as if they were in a hurry. Then came the whispered conversations in the hallway, the cell phone put away as soon as I entered the room, that feeling they were hiding something. I noticed Carol and Brian exchanging glances during breakfast, while Alice preferred to look away and strike up a conversation about anything other than future plans. On February 22, 2022, Brian showed up earlier than usual. He arrived with the same excuse as always, saying he wanted to check on me, but he spent most of the time on the phone, pacing back and forth. I asked if there was a problem, and he responded with a forced smile, saying everything was fine, just work matters. The following Sunday, Carol took me to the grocery store. She spent the entire drive asking how I'd been feeling lately, if I'd consider slowing down, maybe taking a vacation. I remained silent, listening to that prepared speech, as if I'd memorized it all. At the checkout, she dropped a brochure for a nursing home. I picked it up and read it slowly. Residential Villa Serena. Comfort, safety, and care for the elderly. Just hearing that name made my palms sweat. I pretended not to notice, but something told me it wasn't just innocent advice. On March 2nd, Alice showed up after lunch with a ready-made cake, a rare thing for her. She sat next to me, put her hand on my leg, and told me I'd worked hard my whole life and deserved a real rest. When I heard the word rest, I felt a strange chill down my spine. She tried to sound excited, but I could sense a hidden nervousness, her gaze shifting away from mine. The atmosphere grew more tense with each visit. They started showing up together, making dinner plans for no reason, bringing up topics like well-being in old age, listing benefits I'd never asked for. When I asked if they were concerned about my health, no one had a clear answer. It was just vague talk that they wanted the best for me. They were just looking out for me. 2 weeks later, the three of them visited. It was 11 o'clock in the morning, a Thursday. They arrived together with that rehearsed posture. Carol opened the conversation by saying they had something important to discuss. Brian placed a black folder on the table. Alice fidgeted with her ring non-stop. They said they were thinking about my future, that I needed closer medical care, that the house was too big for me. I stood there listening, trying to understand where this was going. Then came the proposal, to visit Residential Villa Serena. Just to get to know it, no strings attached. The following Saturday, we got into their car. Carol was driving, Brian in the front seat, and Alice was with me in the back. The drive to the nursing home took 27 minutes. The radio tuned to a random station, no one talking. When we arrived, I smelled the strong smell of disinfectant as soon as I walked through the door. A smiling employee appeared, saying she would show me around. We rode the elevator up, the walls all white, the posters with motivational quotes. They showed me my room and talked about balanced meals, recreational activities, and physical therapy 3 times a week. I listened to it all without reacting, feeling my palms grow sweatier. We drove home in silence. That night, I didn't sleep well. I wondered if I was really disrupting their lives. At breakfast, I tried to bring up the past, remembering when we had nothing and shared everything, but no one seemed willing to listen. 2 weeks later, they returned with an envelope and a clipboard. Carol said she only needed a signature to facilitate banking procedures in case I needed any medical procedures at the nursing home. I didn't want to sign, but they insisted, saying it was for my own good. My mouth felt dry as I picked up the pen. I signed the paper. Neither of them looked me in the eye. The following week, Brian showed up to pick up my clothes and medicine. I asked if he would be long, but he looked away and said it was temporary. On April 7, 2022, I was dropped off at residential Villa Serena. Brian was in charge of the paperwork. Carol escorted me to my room. Alice brought a box with my photos, 2 dresses, and some old books. No one cried. They just said it was for my own good. I sat on the bed, listening to the sound of muffled voices in the hallway, trying to understand when I had become a nuisance, an expense. Before I knew it, I was alone in the room. The door closed without a goodbye. The only thing that stayed with me at that moment was the feeling that something much bigger was happening, and I had no idea what was coming. The first night at residential Villa Serena was a hole in time. I woke before sunrise, unsure if I was dreaming or if this was truly my life now. The cold light from the hallway filtered through the crack in the door and cast shadows on my feet. I forced myself to get up from the wooden bed, its mattress hard, and the same strong chemical smell I'd smelled when I'd entered. The bedside table was small, with a pitcher of water, a plastic cup, and 3 pills I'd set aside the night before. One for blood pressure, another for cholesterol, and the third for sleep. I didn't even touch. I couldn't sleep. The round clock on the wall read 6:11. I sat there, watching the hand slowly tick by, as if each minute were longer than it should have been. The bedroom window overlooked a courtyard where no one passed. When I tried to open it, I felt the safety catch. It's a protection system that only allows the window to open a hand's width, supposedly to prevent accidents. I sat in the chair next to my suitcase and looked at my scattered things. 2 old photos, one from 1987, taken on Brian's birthday, and another from Christmas 1999, when Carol and Alice were still little. It was all that was left of my house. Breakfast was served at 7 o'clock sharp. A waitress knocked on the door, entered without waiting for an answer, and left a tray on the table. Cold sliced bread, margarine, a glass of thin milk, and a stale banana. There was no conversation. I sat down and ate slowly, trying to make the time pass faster, but the food seemed tasteless. The silence was broken only by the rumble of the food cart in the hallways and the distant voices of other people. Only then did I realize that no one there called anyone by name, only numbers or ma'am and sir. Time seemed to stand still in that place. Every hour, a routine. At 9, the plates were cleared. At 11, the medicine was delivered. At noon, lunch was served, and so on, all timed. There was no improvisation. I even missed the complaints from the bakery's customers. On the first day, I tried to talk to a few people. There was a lady named Lydia. She must have been 90, but she only nodded when someone spoke. A man named Alvaro read the newspaper every day, but never responded with anything other than, "Good morning." It was a kind of invisible line, each person waiting for the next appointment on their calendar, as if time had its own rhythm within the nursing home. My biggest fear was that it would swallow me up. To keep from going crazy, I created rituals. After lunch, I would sit on the edge of the bed, pick up the family photo, and begin talking quietly, as if my children could still hear. I asked God not to let it turn me into someone invisible. I prayed with my eyes closed, and sometimes I asked for strength to not lose the little hope I still had left. The nights were the worst. The room would go completely dark after 10 p.m., when the hallway lights would be turned off. The only sound was the hurried footsteps of the staff changing shifts, and every now and then an alarm going off in another room. Once, I woke up breathing quickly, unsure of where I was. I went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and it took me a while to recognize my own face. I had dark circles under my eyes, pale skin, and disheveled hair. I grabbed the sink, washed my face, and promised myself I wouldn't let fear take over. I couldn't give up on myself, not after everything I'd faced. I began to organize my days so I wouldn't lose control. In the morning, I'd walk the hallway 15 times, counting each step. At lunch, I'd sit near the sunniest window in the cafeteria, just to feel a little light on my face. In the afternoon, I'd write on the back of an envelope anything that reminded me of who I was before. A few old phrases, a list of breads I'd sold on the bakery's best days, the names of customers I'd never seen again. I did everything I could to remember that my life had had meaning. There wasn't much room for distractions, so there was plenty of time to dwell on what had happened. It was impossible not to feel discarded, replaced by a cold, faceless system. I'd find myself staring at the hallway phone, waiting for one of them to call, but it never rang. Once a week, an employee named Helena would stop by to ask if I wanted to leave a message for the family. I'd say no. I figured it best not to beg for attention from someone who had already made it clear they no longer cared. Sometimes I wondered if I would ever get out. My biggest fear was getting sick and never seeing the outside world again. But every time hopelessness threatened to creep in, I looked back at the photos, remembering birthdays at the bakery, long nights of work, the laughter of children in the backyard, the smell of warm bread at 5 in the morning. That was what kept me going. I clung to those memories like someone clinging to a plank in the middle of the sea, trying not to sink completely. Time inside the nursing home doesn't carry the same weight as it does outside. A day can last an eternity. And just when you think you've seen everything bad that can happen, you discover there are other kinds of pain, the kind that makes no noise, doesn't show up on tests, but slowly takes over. I've never been one to accept defeat easily. But there, surrounded by white walls and a timed routine, even my stubbornness seemed small. That's when I realized that if I wanted to truly survive, I would have to reinvent myself again. And it was exactly at that moment that an unexpected change knocked on the door, changing everything I thought I knew about loneliness. Just when you think there's no way out, life sometimes surprises you in the most unexpected ways. It was on a cloudy Monday, April 25th, 2022, that Nora was placed in the room next to mine. It didn't take half an hour for her to knock on my door, with a curious expression and her hair piled high, held back by a red scarf that seemed out of place in there. She introduced herself in a firm voice, saying she was 78 years old and was there on behalf of her children, as if joking to hide her resentment. I found it strange, because right off the bat, she'd said she couldn't stand rooms without the sound of pots and pans, that at home she was known for complaining even about the thin soup. I didn't have time to react. She sat down in the chair and began to tell me she used to be a teacher, that she lived nearby, and that she had 2 children who think they know everything, but they don't even know how to choose potatoes at the market. Nora's energy was different. She didn't play the victim, complaining about everything with a humor that cut through the nursing home's heavy atmosphere. By the second day, she had already befriended the cafeteria worker, gotten an extra helping of Jell-O, and even made Mr. Alvaro, who I thought would never smile, laugh. She said the only thing worthwhile about that place was the free time to sort through old paperwork, because at home no one would let her organize anything. It didn't take long for us to realize we had similar stories. At first, we only exchanged a few words during walks down the hallway, but trust soon blossomed. She realized I didn't want small talk, so she was direct. She asked what had brought me there. I responded with a summary of my story, and when I finished, she looked me straight in the eye and said I wasn't the only one who had been abandoned by my children. She shared that her children had held unannounced meetings, changed ownership of her apartment while she was resting in the nursing home, and only informed me after everything was done. At that moment, I realized I wasn't the only one trying to pick up the pieces of a life dismantled without my consent. Our routine changed. Every afternoon, we sat near the hallway window, always on the same bench. I brought my photos. She brought a small pad full of notes. She called it my secret file. That's how we began comparing papers. One day, Nora showed me a copy of a power of attorney she'd signed without realizing it. She said she suspected her children were planning something to speed up the transfer of assets. This set off a red flag in me. I began remembering the papers my children had placed in front of me, the quick explanations, the insistence that I sign quickly. The next afternoon, I brought my own documents to the window. We spent almost an hour reading together, Nora with her thick-rimmed glasses pointing out odd phrases and mismatched dates. She didn't mince words. Once, she called one of the staff members, asked her to explain how the nursing home's mail and visitation system worked, and said she wanted to know who had access to the residents' information. She became suspicious when she heard the answer, wrote everything down, and told me never to trust anyone who smiled too much right away. On the 3rd Saturday, she discovered that the Villa Serena social worker was writing monthly reports that went directly to family members but didn't share anything with the residents. "This is a system set up to look like protection, but it's pure control," she commented, scribbling on her notepad. We supported each other in the little things. When one of us was feeling down, the other would strike up a conversation, recall some funny story from the past, talk about food, music, old soap operas. We laughed at the complaints, the rigid schedules, the watery juice at dinner. With her, my mind drifted back to a time when problem-solving was routine, not a threat. At night, when loneliness threatened, we exchanged discreet notes, sketched out imaginary escape plans, and wrote letters that would never be sent, just to relieve the pressure. Within days, Nora became my ally. She noticed details I didn't, asked staff questions, talked to other residents, and gathered tidbits of information that we then pieced together, trying to understand if it was just our paranoia or if there was truly something bigger going on behind the scenes. She encouraged me to pay attention to the names of lawyers mentioned, conversations between staff and family members of other seniors. Once, she caught a nurse commenting on a special authorization for asset transfers and advised me to always ask twice before signing any paperwork. It was thanks to Nora's presence that I felt some control over my life again. She said that to survive in a place where they want to erase your history, the secret is to never let them see you as someone who's been erased. With her, I stopped being just another elderly woman waiting for a visitor on Sunday. I began observing, noting details, questioning procedures, and thinking of solutions that previously seemed impossible. It was this energy that lit a spark of hope within me. But if I thought things were already strange, I hadn't yet realized how hidden doors rock bottom can be. After a few weeks of friendship with Nora, the pieces that had previously seemed loose began to fall into place in a frightening way. It was on a rainy Tuesday, May 10th, 2022, that everything changed. I was sitting in the reception area, waiting for a routine appointment with the nursing home's geriatrician, when I overheard a conversation between a staff member and a man in a suit carrying a black briefcase. He spoke softly, but kept repeating the same phrase: documentation for interdiction. Nora, who was next to me leafing through an old magazine, dropped everything and struck up a conversation with the staff member while I listened intently. When the woman left, Nora got straight to the point. "Margaret, that black briefcase isn't a good thing, you know? They don't come here just for coffee." I felt my palms sweat. Late in the afternoon, we obtained access to a piece of paper left on the reception desk. It was a notification from the registry office addressed to me, with the subject line, "Request for interdiction due to civil incapacity." I didn't need anything else to understand. Nora didn't rest until she got Nurse Anna, who had already warmed to our conversations, to quickly show her a medical report stating that I was showing clear signs of disorientation and risks to my own safety. It was absurd. It was a lie. I was outraged at the mere thought of Carol, Brian, and Alice signing such a request without telling me, putting words in the mouths of the nursing home staff. In the days that followed, every detail took on new meaning. I remembered their insistence that I take tranquilizers, the visits always short, the conversations that stopped as soon as I arrived in the room. Nora said these strategies were common. First they make you seem confused, then they say they only want the best for you, and finally they convince everyone you've lost your mind. One morning, I received a letter from a local bank requesting a signature update due to legal protection. That same week, a former customer of the bakery, Mr. Alfredo, stopped by for a quick visit. He said he missed my cheese bread, but in the middle of the conversation, he slipped me a folded note, telling me not to trust anyone who asked to sign more paperwork without consulting an outsider. Nora and I began to compile everything that seemed strange: visitor lists, copies of documents, signature dates, even the names of lawyers who appeared on the reports. We discovered that on March 22nd, a month before I was admitted, my children had appeared in a hearing at the Southbridge Family Court, claiming I was no longer capable of caring for my own property. They took medical reports provided by the nursing home and filled out forms saying I forgot important dates and put my health at risk. The truth was, if anyone there forgot dates, it was them. They forgot my birthday. They forgot everything I'd done for them. At first, I considered confronting the staff, but Nora persuaded me to proceed cautiously. She said I needed to gather evidence, not just vent. It was her idea to request copies of all the signed documents, claiming a review was needed for the health plan. Each copy came with another clue: a property transfer document in Carol's name, authorization to use my account signed by Brian, a power of attorney given to Alice to withdraw money from the bank. Until that moment, I thought it was overkill, but everything was there, printed, stamped, each page a brick in the wall of my own prison. I asked Nurse Anna for help, as she already suspected something. She took the risk of taking photos of the files and sent them to my former lawyer, Dr. Ricardo, who still maintained contact with some of the bakery's former clients. In one of these exchanges, we discovered that Brian had sold the family car in my name on April 27th, 3 days after I entered the nursing home. Indignation took over me in a way I can't even explain. I felt my breath catch, my stomach churn, and an overwhelming urge to knock on the nursing home door and demand an explanation. But Nora restrained me. She said it was time to act intelligently. The following week, I received a visit from Ms. Celia, a longtime client, who brought a box of cookies and an envelope hidden among the cookies. Inside was a card with the name of another lawyer in town who specialized in family law. I wrote to him secretly, using an envelope Nora provided, and asked to schedule a visit under the guise of reviewing documents. Everything was done in secret, because any misstep could jeopardize everything. Seeing my children using false arguments to have me interdicted, lying to the judge and the doctors, was a shock that hurt like nothing before. I remembered every birthday, every night they had a fever, every hand-washed school uniform, and now I saw my own children organizing to erase me from history in exchange for a house, a bank account, a piece of land. At the same time, that shock became fuel. I began writing down everything: meeting dates, employee names, document details. With the help of Nora, Anna, Dr. Ricardo, and the bakery customers, I gathered evidence one by one. With each new sheet of paper, the urge to react grew. It was in this climate of indignation and fear that I realized it was no longer just a matter of pride or money. It was a matter of dignity, of not letting them take away the last thing I had, the right to own my story. But while I was preparing everything for the reaction, I still didn't know that the worst kind of betrayal happens when you least expect it, and that turning the tables required more than proof. It required courage to face what lay ahead. That's when I realized that if I continued to remain silent, I would lose everything I'd worked hard to achieve my entire life. At the end of the 3rd week of May, I summoned the courage and asked Helena, the employee, to schedule a visit with the lawyer Nora had recommended, Dr. Henrique Bastos. I said I needed help reviewing pension and inheritance documents, pretending not to understand the procedures, just to avoid raising suspicions. They allowed it, but on the condition that it be a monitored and brief visit, lasting 20 minutes, in the nursing home's meeting room where there were cameras. I remained alert the entire time. Before the meeting, I wrote down all my questions on a piece of paper, using small print to fit more information, and hid everything between the pages of an old cookbook, which I'd purposely brought to the meeting. When Enrique arrived, we kept the conversation superficial, but I took the opportunity to pass the notes under the table, amid smiles and questions about bread. With a quick glance, he read my notes and told me to separate all original documents, especially those signed by me or my children. He explained that, in interdiction cases, every signature and date makes a difference. Any error could be evidence of bad faith or abuse of a disabled person. For a layman, these traps are difficult to spot, so it was crucial to have someone specialized scrutinize every line. Nora helped me sort and review all the paperwork. At night, we wrote everything down in her notebook: the date signed, who was present, which employee witnessed it, and details about the document's appearance. I relied on her courage to ask for copies of medical records, saying it was to update my medication list. It was always a risk, because we knew the children could find out at any moment and nullify everything. The feeling of danger was constant. With each new document that reached the lawyer's hands, I imagined the damage a single slip-up could cause. One of the most tense moments occurred on a Wednesday, June 1st. Old Alfredo, a longtime customer at the bakery, showed up for a visit with bread wrapped in parchment paper. Inside the package, he hid a flash drive. He hid it well, chatting about recipes and how much he missed cheese bread, but took the opportunity to quietly ask if I needed anything. I slipped him a note and the hidden flash drive. Inside were photos of the documents, audio recordings of me describing what had happened, and copies of the letters I'd received from the bank. I asked him to personally deliver them to Dr. Henrique should anything happen to me. Alfredo promised me confidentiality and left, pretending nothing unusual had happened. Meanwhile, my children's visits grew increasingly cold. They always came together, asked quick questions, and looked away if I mentioned lawyers or paperwork. On June 23rd, Brian tried to pressure me into signing another document, saying it was just an update to my health insurance plan. I refused, saying I wouldn't sign anything without fully understanding it. He insisted, but I remained calm, even though my hand was shaking inside. The tension was enormous. I knew I was buying time, but I could lose everything in an instant if they discovered what I was up to. During this period, Nora proved to be more of a partner than ever. When Nurse Anna became suspicious of my children's movements and began to notice strangeness in the nursing home reports, she joined us. Anna would alert us when there were staff meetings, when documents were being sent to the notary's office, and when it was possible to use the office phone without the risk of someone overhearing. Once, I had to secretly call Henrique. I pretended I needed to update my pension information, but in the call, in less than 2 minutes, I explained everything that had happened. He replied that he was acting quickly. He was preparing a court request for an injunction to block transactions in the account and properties until the matter was clarified. With each step, I could feel the pressure mounting. I slept little, wrote everything down, and guarded myself against contradiction. I knew that if my children suspected anything, they would try to silence me completely. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered the sacrifice of raising 3 children without help, the dignity I had always placed above pride. Now, it wasn't just for me. It was for all the people who had overcome humiliation to keep their stories alive. On June 28th, I received an envelope with new documents from the bank, confirming an attempted large withdrawal authorized by a legal representative. This set off a red flag in my lawyer, who expedited the process to ensure my protection. I was no longer afraid of confrontation. I was afraid of losing my story without a fight. And there, between quick visits, hidden messages, hurried phone calls, and sleepless nights, I realized that those who thought I was weak had no idea how strong a betrayed woman can be when she decides to turn things around. The clock was ticking. Danger was everywhere, but it was my turn to act. What I didn't know was that the final blow was about to come, and that none of my children were prepared for what was coming. The day that seemed impossible just a few months before arrived. July 15th, 2022, 9 o'clock in the morning, in the Barreto and Bastos law firm in downtown Southbridge. The atmosphere was tense, hot despite the air conditioning, and every seat was occupied by a familiar face. Family, cousins, 2 uncles, old neighbors, and even loyal customers of the bakery who insisted on coming. My children arrived together, avoiding everyone's gaze. Carol tried to control her expression. Brian seemed uneasy. Alice clutched a tissue, the 3 of them murmuring quietly. Nora, standing firmly beside me, crossed her arms and looked straight ahead, giving me a silent handshake as if to say, "Go ahead, it's your turn now." Attorney Henrique Bastos opened the meeting by explaining that, by court order, the will had to be read in front of everyone, due to the ongoing allegations and interdiction and fraud proceedings. He arranged the papers on the table, turned on the recorder, and handed the floor to the notary, who gave a brief summary of the case. The silence was thick, each word seeming to carry double weight. The document was read line by line. At first, only formal information: date of birth, list of assets, names of children. Then came the important part. Bastos read aloud the clause that changed everything. It is expressly determined that any child or heir who, through fraud, coercion, abandonment, or attempted interdiction without medical grounds, has participated in the process of removing the owner of this inheritance, loses all and any rights to the assets registered herein. The children's eyes widened. Carol tried to say something, but the lawyer raised his hand and asked for silence. The evidence came in: audio recordings, copies of emails, fraudulent medical reports, and even screenshots of the bank transfers Brian and Alice tried to make in my name. The atmosphere became even more tense. With each detail revealed, behind-the-scenes conversations were exposed. My uncles whispered among themselves. Neighbors looked at my children with shock and shame. The lawyer showed documents signed under duress, statements from nursing home staff, notes from former bakery customers, proving my lucidity and independence. At the height of the tension, Carol stood up, crying, trying to justify herself. We only wanted the best for her. Brian's face was covered in his hands. Alice was shaking and apologized, but the lawyer continued. The decision is clear. Anyone who participated in any malicious action will lose their inheritance. Bastos finished by reading the most anticipated part. The new beneficiaries would be social organizations from Southbridge, employees of residential Villa Serena who had helped me, and a few specific people, like Nora and Alfredo, who showed solidarity when everyone else turned their backs. The final silence was broken by pleas for forgiveness, but by then it was too late. I looked at each of my children. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't plot revenge. What was done was no longer just about money, it was about justice. I stood up, quietly thanked the lawyer, and left the room feeling lightheaded, without needing to lower my eyes. Those who thought they could erase me from their own history learned the hard way that a mother's worth isn't measured by a signed document or a bank account, but by everything she builds and by who she chooses to carry in her heart. In the hallway, next to Nora, I only thought one thing. Sometimes to survive, the greatest strength isn't screaming, but maintaining your dignity when everyone expects you to fall. And there, finally, I was freed from the weight that wasn't mine. What happened next completely changed my outlook on life. As news of the court ruling spread through the nursing home, every corner of residential Villa Serena seemed to be buzzing about what had happened. It was impossible to step into the hallway without hearing someone whisper, "Did you see what Mrs. Margaret did? They say she faced her own children in court." For the first time in months, I wasn't just another name on the list of residents. They began to look at me differently, some with admiration, others with a hint of pride, as if my victory represented a part of everyone there. The staff, who until then had kept their distance for fear of trouble with family members, began to approach, bringing strong coffee, offering an extra minute at the patio window, asking how I was feeling. One of them, Donna Rosa, whispered in my ear, "You've shown me that no one needs to accept injustice in silence." The more reserved elderly people would seek me out in the late afternoon, sit next to me, and even without saying much, keep me company. Within a few days, there were 5 of us sharing the dinner table, each telling a different story of abandonment or disillusionment, stories that had previously been kept hidden out of shame. Nora stayed by my side the entire time. She said that true justice is when we can lay our heads on the pillow without regret. With her help, we created an informal support group for seniors who had experienced the same kind of abandonment. It was nothing official, just a few chairs by the window, coffee and cookies, conversations that started shyly and ended in sincere advice. Many had never shared what they'd been through, not even to their families. There, they discovered they could speak out without fear of being ridiculed or treated as a problem. Little by little, residential Villa Serena began to change. Staff began to listen more, giving notice before bringing any documents for residents to sign. Respect gained ground where before there had been only routine. Even the nursing home management realized they could no longer treat the elderly as objects or expenses. Deep down, I knew the transformation wasn't solely my fault, but seeing the effect of a courageous decision ripple through the daily lives of others gave me a feeling of victory that no material prize in the world could match. The family's respect didn't return the way I'd hoped. The children showed up to apologize, promised visits, but I no longer expected anything from them. I told them I forgave them, but that now it was time for them to move on with their lives, and I with mine, without false promises. I held no anger, only the certainty that I was no longer invisible. Those who thought they could silence me had to watch my resistance become an example for others. In July, we organized the nursing home's first Courage Cafe, bringing together those who wanted to talk about abandonment, fear, and starting over. People came from other homes in the city, and former customers from the bakery brought fresh bread and life stories. There, I realized that the greatest wealth we leave behind isn't a home or money, but the strength we put into the world, even when everything seems lost. Life didn't give me back what it took, but it gave me something else, a respect earned through pain, a dignity no one else could touch. Time passed. My routine changed. I no longer counted the days waiting for a visit, nor did I expect to receive flowers on my birthday. My victory was seeing other elderly people finding their voices, employees laughing in the hallway, ordinary people saying to me, "Thank you for not giving up." Nora said we may grow old, But courage, once awakened, never sleeps. And she was right. After all, I learned that starting over means accepting what never returns, but it's also knowing, every day, that no injustice is definitive when we decide to get up from the table and reclaim our own name. If I could leave just one thing recorded in this story, it would be the value of the time we have. For a long time, I thought that the time of fighting for space, for respect, for dignity, was only for the young. But I discovered that it's never too late to take control of your own life, even when the world seems determined to erase you, to push you into a corner, to silence you in the silence of oblivion. Aging is not losing. Aging is a privilege we earn every day, and no one has the right to steal the story you've built with your own hands. I learned that no matter how hard they try to tear up your roots, it's always possible to start over. Friendship, faith, and dignity are treasures that can't be saved in a bank, nor can they fit into a will. They're what remains after the dust settles, after the disappointment of others becomes just a small detail on your path. Nora taught me that the strength we need sometimes isn't in grand gestures, but in waking up in the morning, taking a deep breath, and deciding not to give up on ourselves. And faith, even a small one, can be an immense shelter when everything around us crumbles. Looking out the nursing home window now, I see the courtyard with different eyes. It's not a prison, it's a starting point. I see the friends I've made, the stories I've heard, and the respect I've finally built, not by shouting, but by quiet courage. I forgave my children, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. And I learned that rebuilding is harder than building from scratch, but much more valuable. Those who truly live know that nothing is guaranteed, and that life will test our limits until the very end. But as long as there are people willing to fight for their dignity, there will always be a chance to turn things around. My story is just one among many, but if it made you think, then it was worth sharing. What really matters, in the end, isn't what they tried to take from you, but what you refuse to lose. Now I ask you, have you ever felt this sensation? That strange feeling that something was about to go wrong, even when everything seemed perfect? Tell me in the comments if you've ever experienced this. I want to understand what you would do if you were in that situation. Because at the end of the day, we are all survivors of what life throws our way. And no one can take away the value of those who choose not to bow their heads. You felt the truth of this story. It's real, it hurts, it's disturbing, but it also lifts up those who've been knocked down. Only those who have experienced the fear of being erased understand what it's like to fight to reclaim their name. Stories like these unite us, make us look within, and realize that deep down, everyone carries a silent battle. This isn't just my story, now it's yours too. Because you stayed until the end, because you felt every word and saw what truly matters. There are no more excuses. This experience has left its mark on you. Now leave a like, share it with those who need to hear it. Your gesture could be a helping hand to someone who's about to give up. There's no room here for those who hide. Be part of this community, people who don't accept injustice, who won't allow themselves to be silenced. Subscribe now, because every week you'll find real stories that challenge the impossible, accounts that will take you out of your comfort zone and remind you of the strength that exists within each of us. Turn on notifications to be the first to listen, to reflect, to never forget that dignity is not negotiable. This channel is your haven for courage, for discomfort, for a new beginning. And now, don't stop. What you just heard was intense, but what comes next will challenge everything you believed possible. Get ready for another, even more surprising story that's already waiting for you. The next video is on the screen. Click now and come understand why, in the end, no one survives alone, and everyone has the right to rewrite their own story.